Hi there, how's it going? By the way, today, Sunday, October 30th, I'm going to be doing my second Patreon roundtable. This is where I invite people, subscribers to my Patreon channel, to hop on and ask me questions directly on the broadcast or make comments or have conversations about whatever's going on. So please go down below to the link and sign up, and I'll see you tonight. It'll be at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard. Anyway, it's my tonight, the U.S.'s morning. But anyway, I'm not so sure that you guys want to actually subscribe to my Patreon channel, and I'll tell you why. Because it's looking that I'm kind of stupid, and I'll explain why. Over the last couple of days, we've been talking about how the Zelensky regime forces, or the Americans, or the Brits, or some combination thereof, launched these drone attacks on Sevastopol in the Crimea. And the attack itself was kind of rinky-dink. They sent 9 unmanned aerial drones and 7 underwater drones. And the Russians got them all except a couple of the underwater drones. The damage is not quite known, but it's not going to be that big. I mean, it's certainly not determinant. It's not going to change anything insofar as the war is concerned. And so, what I should have asked is, why did they launch this rinky-dink attack there? That doesn't serve any military purpose. And today, this morning, as I wake up and catch up on the news, I'm realizing why. Oh, it's so simple. You see, because the Russians, as a reaction to this attack, they suspended the grain deal. Now, what was the grain deal? The grain deal was basically that the Russians would provide a safe passage from Odessa and the other ports on the Black Sea that are controlled by Zelensky regime forces, as well as Kherson and Mykolaiv and so forth, so that grain shipments could go through the Black Sea to the Bosphorus and then on to wherever, the customers wherever. A lot of this grain was going to the global south. Now, the Russians, following this attack, they announced a suspension of this safe passage because, of course, they don't want to expose their ships to a military attack. They can't guarantee the safety of the civilian ships going through it. So they suspended the deal because they realized that the Americans, NATO forces, the Zelensky regime, has no intention of maintaining peace in the Black Sea so that the grain shipments can go through, right? Well, this morning Ukraine time, all of a sudden, the Zelensky regime announces that because of this, that Russia has once again weaponized food, that Russia should not be a part of the G20. And I hear that Joe Biden said the following. Joe Biden believes that Moscow has no reason to suspend the grain deal. Quote, "This is completely outrageous. It will lead to increased hunger. There is no reason for them to act in this way. They're always looking for some rationale to be able to say the reason they're doing something outrageous is because the West made them do it." Well, the West made them do it by attacking their ships in the Black Sea, for crying out loud, okay? And so they don't want to risk of other of their warships being attacked indiscriminately by and unprovoked and by surprise by the NATO forces. So that's why they suspended it, right? But now, the Americans and Zelensky, they're saying that Russia should not participate in the G20. It's uncivilized. And what was the phrase? Zelensky himself said, now we need a tough international reaction, both at the UN level and at other levels, in particular the G20. How can Russia be among others in the G20 if it deliberately works for hunger on several continents? This is nonsense. Russia has no place in the top 20. Well, Russia is part of the top 20 industrialized nations of the world. That's indisputable, okay? So it does have a place there, number one. But number two, of course, the whole reason for this bullshit is because they don't want Putin to go to the G20 summit that is taking place in a few weeks in Singapore. See, the Americans blew up Nord Stream, or the Americans or the Brits, or however the hell that was. The Americans, the Brits, the Poles, a combination thereof, however it happened, they blew up the Nord Stream pipeline so that Germany could not lose its nerve and go back to Russia and try to return to status quo ante insofar as gas supplies is concerned. And they did this provocation in the Black Sea insofar as hitting Sevastopol with these drones in order to elicit this reaction from the Russians, so that the Russians would very rationally decide, okay, no more grain shipments because we're not going to run the risk of our own ships getting sunk. And they're using this as a club to beat the Russians insofar as the global south is concerned. Because they're very concerned about the fact that the global south, Latin America, Africa, Central America, Asia, South Asia, India, all the rest of the world basically is on the side of the Russians, right? And the Russians have repeatedly made efforts to make nice with all of these other non-aligned nations and show them, look, we're trying to work with you here. We're doing this grain deal to get you food, right? And so now they're doing this so as to isolate Russia from the G20. They don't want Putin to go there. And of course, they don't want the comparison between Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin at the G20. See, because the leaders of the G20, there was this photo op that happened. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, went to the United Nations. And it was so goddamn embarrassing for the Americans because, nobody really wanted to meet with Anthony Blinken or any of the Americans. But there was this long line of foreign ministers and ambassadors from other countries around the world who all wanted to shake hands with Lavrov, okay? It was pretty damn funny. I mean, you could obviously tell, who they thought was the truly important person. And so they want to diplomatically isolate the Russians by doing this. By look, the Russians, they're weaponizing food, see? They're doing this for no reason whatsoever. Haven't you noticed that it's always for no reason whatsoever that the Russians do stuff? Mm-hmm. They have no rational justification to do something. They just decide to do it. Like they invaded Ukraine for no reason whatsoever. Not because Zelensky wanted nuclear weapons in Ukraine and nobody else was telling him to shut up. Not because the Zelensky regime was preparing a major offensive against the Donbass that was going to be set off in mid-March and the Russians essentially beat them to it. No. The Russians invaded for no reason whatsoever. And the Russians now are blocking grain shipments for no reason whatsoever. I mean, these guys, they're so underhanded and so pathetic. Mm-hmm. Because, them not wanting to have Putin at the G20 summit is a show of weakness. And that's what it is, man. See? They don't want that comparison between Biden and Putin. They don't want Putin to shake hands with, a couple of dozen foreign leaders at the G20 summit. Mm-hmm. While nobody wants to talk to Joe Biden, or worse, Joe Biden starts wandering off as he is wont to do, I mean, they don't want that photo finish comparison. They don't want it at all. And so they are now desperately trying to isolate Russia from the G20 and from the global south generally. But of course, this assumes that the people of the G20 nations, that they're stupid. This is assuming that they don't look at the news, that they don't have intelligence services that know exactly what the hell happened. Everybody knows. Everybody who's paying attention knows. This was on, all over the place. You see videos of one of the underwater drones going to its target, being shot at by a Russian helicopter. It was pretty cool footage, by the way. And so they know exactly the score. And so all of this bullshit, it's not for the consumption of the global south. It's not going to work with the global south. It's for the Western domestic public. It's for people like you. It's for people like you in the West, and most of my audience is in the West. It's to convince you that, number one, Putin has weaponized food for no reason whatsoever, and that he is internationally isolated. Everybody despises him and hates him and thinks that he's an evil, Putler. Right? That's the whole goal of this bullshit. Mm-hmm. And I should have realized this when it happened. It didn't really occur to me. But these reactions, oh man, now you understand the puzzle. And pieces just snap together just so easily. Mm-hmm. And so, maybe you guys shouldn't be listening to me because I didn't catch on to this shit, man. It's 2 days in a row. The other day I said that, the 101st Airborne might be sent to Odessa when it was much more obvious that it would be sent to Transnistria, to grab Transnistria, right? And here I am. I was thinking, why the hell did they do something so trivial as sending these, dozen-odd drones to hit Sevastopol when there's no military operation going on in Sevastopol? This random strike means absolutely nothing. And now you know. It's all a diplomatic play. It's trying to isolate the Russians. And it's not going to work. It's not going to work with the people who actually matter. Now, whether the Americans succeed in lobbying the G20 organizers, the summit organizers, and succeed in excluding Putin, maybe they do, maybe they don't. I personally think that if they do succeed, then probably the Indian and Chinese leaders might say something. Maybe they'll decide and say, well, if Russia isn't going to be going, why should we go? I mean, it's pointless, and so we're not going to go. It could be that. I don't know. I mean, frankly, I'm just spitballing insofar as that regard is concerned. But insofar as why this attack happened, now we know. Now you know. Understand what's going on.